So, every kid needs a champion. That was the topic of Rita Pierson's passionate TED Talk about how students need a teacher that believes in them. She tells a story about how she handed back a test with 2 out of 20 questions correct to a student. The child asked Pierson if his grade he received was an F. She said, yes. And then when he questioned her about why she put a smiley face next to the grade, she said, you didn't do all bad. You got 2 right. You're on your way. This child's life was changed forever. He looked at something that seemed like a failure and made a choice to hold his head high and to do better next time. Too often young students are told that they can't sing or shouldn't sing. And sometimes it's because they sang too loud, they stick out like a sore thumb. Sometimes it's because their voices are too high or too low. And maybe it's because they really are just tone deaf. It breaks my heart to see that and hear stories of so many students and adults that tell me that they can't sing. And when someone tells me that they don't sing, I usually ask them the follow-up question. Who did it to you? They gave me this funny look and I clarify. I say, who told you you can't sing? It's usually a teacher or a family member. I have a mantra in my classroom. It goes, I have a voice, it is a unique voice, and I will use it to make a joyful noise. I never minded having that tone-deaf kid in my class. They never left the class quite as tone-deaf as when they came in. I try to make it my goal to become one of those students' musical champions. I can point out the champions in my life and how they helped me through my school years. And I challenge you to think about those musical champions that are in your life. Go ahead right now. Just think about one person who believed in you as a music maker. Maybe it was that elementary music teacher who put that first Orff mallet instrument in your hand and took all the keys away and made the pentatonic scale. Maybe it was your show choir director or your marching band drum major. It could have been your music history professor that finally helped you realize that opera's not all bad. Okay? But I'm going to go and share with you 3 musical champions from my life who taught me different life lessons that have shaped the way I teach. They've helped me become a musical champion for my students. The lessons they taught me were 1, do whatever you can to make music happen. Number 2, equip students so that to do what they love. And then number 3, find inspiration that drives you to become a better musician. As Ms. Pierson suggested, one of the things that we never discuss or rarely discuss is the value and importance of human connections, relationships. While each of these life lessons may seem like common sense to most teachers, I want to point out that each of them celebrate a human connection that develops us into a community of music makers. So lesson 1, do whatever it takes to make music happen. When I was a little boy, I would go to my grandmother's house, and I loved being at her house. She always had the best food, it smelled nice, and it was a perfect temperature. Her backyard overlooked this beautiful pine trees and gorgeous water fountain, and there were always squirrels and other furry creatures that my cousins and I could laugh at. But my favorite part of my grandmother's house was an old, mushy-keyed upright piano. And for as long as I can remember, family members would always sit down and play on that piano. During the holidays, my uncles would improvise over the 4 chords of Heart and Soul. My mom would play her favorite pop tunes from the 1960s and 70s, and my grandma would sit there with me or one of my cousins on her lap, and they'd be plunking out children's songs like Mary Had a Little Lamb, Old MacDonald, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, 3 Blind Mice. Grandma would write down her favorite children's songs on a piece of paper with the letters of each pitch on the line. C, C, G, G, A, A, G, F, F, E, E, D, D, C on a piece of notebook paper. She would also take a crayon and she drew the letters on each of the keys so that we knew which buttons to press. At Grandma's house, there was always just as long of a line for the piano as there was for the Nintendo. And my cousins and I would take turns playing solos and duets. Aunts and uncles would join in with their voices or play on other octaves. And in Grandma's house, you didn't need to read notation to enjoy making music. This concept is something that's stuck with me as I've gone out into the teaching profession. I truly believe that every student has a potential to make music, and everyone has the right to make the music that they love. As I mentioned earlier in my class, my mantra is, I have a voice, it is a unique voice, I will use it to make a joyful noise. Some of my favorite choiristers are those who originally told me, I can't sing. They needed someone to believe in them and someone to educate them. That's our jobs as music teachers. When working with adolescents, we educators need to be aware of all of the different issues which our students are dealing. Voice change, body growth, body odor, weird feelings of infatuation, passion, fear, awkwardness upon awkwardness upon awkwardness. But there are certain things that we need to keep in mind so that we can equip our students to become music makers. We need to be champions who pave the way for our students, regardless of disability, perceived talent, or tone deafness. We as educators have the responsibility to empower our students to have successful music making experiences. So while I was a junior high teacher, I had a young man named Jim come up to me one day at open house, and he said, Mr. C, I really want to learn how to sing. His mother smiled, and she said, he's been dreaming of being in choir since first grade. He's been so scared that his autism would keep him from being able to sing. I threw my hands up in the air and I said, do you know how long I've been waiting for you to be in my classroom? During the first rehearsal, I learned really quickly that Jim only had a 2-note range. So I decided I wanted to be Jim's musical champion. I sat Jim right down in the middle of the section of guys and put 2 of my most compassionate singers on either side of him. Jim would know that he was included in a valuable part of our choir. I told him to visit with me after each rehearsal if he had any questions, and that first day he came up to me and he told me how much fun he had. Throughout the semester, we played connect the dots with the notes so that he could see the contour of the line. Throughout the whole semester, his range started to expand just like his classmates. And at the end of the semester, he sang in a scat solo at a performance, and something that his classmates were way too scared to do. Every day after class, Jim came up to me and told me his favorite part of our rehearsal and our time together. His enthusiasm fueled me to become a better teacher. Lesson 2, help your students do what they love. You know, I can't imagine what Jim and I would have missed out on if I told him he couldn't join choir because of his limited range or disability. There was a moment in my own musical endeavors that I was on the other side of the podium, and I had told the choir director how excited I was to be in choir. I was a freshman in high school, and I wanted nothing more to be in the show choir. I made the group, and about a month into the school year, I realized that there was something different between me and the other guys in the choir. See, while they sounded like a bunch of frat guys barking at a frat house, I sounded like an English cathedral boy singer, soprano. And one day during rehearsal, while we were rehearsing the competition ballad, my choir director asked me to see me after class. She asked me how I was doing, and I told her that I was struggling with the notes. I asked her if I could sing soprano or even alto. She told me that if I didn't have the tenor notes by next week, that I would be kicked out of the group. I went home and I cried on my mother's arm for hours, forcing myself to sing as low as I could. And I still remember that feeling, how raw my throat felt when I stood in the next choir rehearsal in tears. I hit the notes, but my choir director was no champion. Across the hall from her room was the band director. I was the only the school's sousaphone player in the marching band, and I didn't enjoy playing tuba anymore. So I went up to my band director that same month and I told him how happy I was with the tuba. I asked him if he would allow me to switch to trumpet, which was an instrument that I had been playing in a second band for about 3 years. He said to me, with a sigh, "We really need you on tuba, but if you love the trumpet so much, you do what you gotta do." So the next day, I brought my trumpet to marching band, and by the end of the semester, by the end of the school year, I was third chair trumpet in the top band, and by my senior year, I was honored to win the most outstanding soloist in the national competition for my rendition of My Funny Valentine on trumpet. My band director allowed me to follow my passion and put my needs and desires before his. He not only was a champion for me, but he was also a champion for my friend Maurice, who ended up becoming the new tuba player for our school. My sophomore year, Maurice and I both went to sectional the All-Star Band on instruments that were fairly new to us. And throughout my career, I've always allowed my students to tell me their desires. They can tell me in person, in emails, in evaluations, or any way of communicating that they want. I find it very important to keep an open line of communication with my students, which allows them to tell me where their passions are. While I get to have the final say on repertoire, choreography, performance practices, I always am sure that my students have the opportunity and the options to have their voices heard. And that's lesson 3, finding inspiration to become the best you can be. As I embarked on my journey as an educator, I have been so lucky to have some colleagues and mentors who take my breath away because of their ability to be great musical champions. My first job after my undergraduate degree was at a small private school in a suburban area. Throughout my tenure at that school, I was honored to work with a part-time band director named Karen Kurtz. Mrs. Kurtz's band program inspired me just as much as her personality did. At first glance, this short, stout, red-haired, dyed, curly-haired woman with glasses and a determined gait was very intimidating. However, the second she stood up on that podium, she was an inspiration to her students. She was also an inspiration to the community and parents and teachers at that school. I had the honor of being her assistant band director, and I would assist her as an extra set of hands in the percussion section. She had 50 students in her top band, and that's hard to do in a school that has less than 200 students, K through 12. She went out in the community and recruited homeschool students and provided for them a place for quality musical instruction. She combined junior high and high school bands into one group. And you'd think that that would affect the group negatively, but I was amazed that this group was constantly and consistently performing level 3 and 4 pieces of music. While our top band was the musical group that consistently brought me to tears at performances, Mrs. Kurtz really reached her stride with her beginning band students. Her ragtag group of beginning band students shifted every year from 18 to 15 to 5th graders, and the instrumentation was always unique. 4 drummers, 1 trumpet, 6 flutes, and 5 clarinets. And then the next year it would be completely evenly matched. The concerts, though, were something that would blow the parents away. The 2 or 3 pieces the groups played together were some of the best beginning band performances that I ever heard. What always shocked me, though, was how she was able to help her students get the courage to play a solo in front of all of their peers and the entire audience. In the 4 years that I was at that school, not one student ever choked or even had to start over. After the concert, the kids and parents all enjoyed cake purchased by Mrs. Kurtz, and everyone knew that the next rehearsal time after the concert was a semi-annual trip to Tasty Freeze, which happened to be owned by one of Mrs. Kurtz's former band members. Mrs. Kurtz was not only a musical champion for her students, but also for me. She inspired me as a teacher and musician. She mentored me, she met with me, and asked me on a regular basis how I was doing as a teacher, and as a musician, and a person. I would watch her interact with her students. I would take note on how she empowered each of them to become smart, independent musicians. And I saw how she developed a community of love and acceptance and pride. Pride for one's music, pride for one's community, pride for oneself. So as you guys prepare to become music educators, I want to challenge you to think about your own musical champions. Who has touched you in your life and inspired, driven, or even pushed you into this profession? What makes you want to carry on the legacy of teaching students how to experience the joys of making music? How can you become a musical champion yourself? Think about how you can be one of those whose students look to for support, guidance, and motivation. Make music happen, no matter what the cost. Guide your students to pursue what they love, and find your own inspiration so that you can inspire others. The biggest compliment I ever got as a teacher was when a young man came up to me after rehearsal, and he said, "Mr. C, I love when you conduct. I can see how much you love music, and your passion makes me want to love music more." To me, being a music educator is not about selecting the best repertoire and putting on a flawless performance. Being a music teacher is about being that champion that every kid needs. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. That was really awesome. So that's similar to stuff that you might see at conferences. Definitely things that you can take away into your own teaching and apply to your own classrooms or within your own chapters. So that's